You're looking for a story about a gay PI set in the 1950s? What a coincidence. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me. So today I wanted to review the Evander Mills mystery series by Lev AC Rosen. So these are the first 3 books in a series. It's not a trilogy. There are more books coming. In fact, there's a 4th book coming in October, I believe. But these first 3 books work really well together. And so I thought it'd be good to do a review of them. The first one is called Lavender House. That was published a couple years ago. The second one is called The Bell in the Fog. And the third one is called Rough Pages. And these are set in 1950s San Francisco, and the main character is a gay PI, and that is kind of the overarching premise. Now, these are a lot of fun, and so let me tell you why I enjoyed them so much, and why I think you'll like them as well. First off, the story starts, the very first story, to give context. The first page, our main character is sitting in a bar in the afternoon on a Monday, drinking himself to oblivion with plans to go jump off the bridge, because he was just outed, and he lost his job in the police force. He was caught during a raid at a gay bar on his knees in the bathroom, and he was fired from his job, everyone knows, and so he sees nothing left in his life but to take his own life. And that is where the first story starts. And while he's at this bar, drowning his sorrows, planning his end, he is intercepted by a woman who wants to hire him for a case. And that is our first story, our first mystery. And needless to say, he solves that mystery, and then he starts this kind of PI business where he works for the queer community. And that is where we get our second and our third stories. So let me tell you about the mysteries themselves, all 3 of them, just in brief, and then we'll get into the overarching parts of all the stories that I really enjoy. So the first mystery is almost like a locked room mystery. So you have one house where the woman who comes and hires him is the matriarch of this house, and her wife has been killed, her quote-unquote wife, because of course this is 1950, and 1952, I think, actually. So not legal wife, but who she considers her wife. And they run a soap company, a very famous soap company. And in this house, which is called Lavender House, she lives with her wife and also their son. And their son is gay, and his boyfriend lives with them, but he also has a wife who's a beard, essentially. And she is also a lesbian, and she has a girlfriend who lives with them most of the time. And then their butler, as well as their cook and the gardener, are also queer. And they've created this little queer utopia for themselves, a safe space, where when you get into the Lavender House, you don't have to pretend anymore. You can be who you are. It is an entirely safe place. But the difficulty or danger of having that safe of a place is the outside hasn't changed at all. So on the inside, everything is safe, but on the outside, you still have this overarching danger as living as a queer person in the 1950s, where your existence is no longer illegal, but it's so close to it, right? And if people know about it, then your business would be shut down, and there are a whole lot of personal, consequences or ramifications. And so like I said, the woman who hired him, her wife died. And the interesting thing about this first story is that if it was a murder, then it had to be someone in the house. And so it had to be one of these characters that you actually root for, that you care about, because you learn about all of the characters that live in this house, all of the people who have created a family for themselves. Yet one of them has to be the killer if she was killed. And so you don't want him to solve the case to some extent. And even the woman who hired him says, look, I want you to prove that it wasn't murder. That is my real hope. But if it is murder, then I want to know who killed my wife. But I also will hate you for telling me who killed my wife. So that is the setup a little bit for the first story. It has this really interesting tension that I think is really smart. The second story, so without giving anything away, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he solves the case. He becomes this queer PI. In the second case, someone from his past shows up, and that person is being blackmailed because he had hired a male prostitute, and there are photos of him with this prostitute, and now he's being blackmailed and he's going to lose his job. So this person comes out of Andy's past and says, you need to help me. And then he goes to find the prostitute to try to figure out what's going on, and the prostitute is missing. So it goes from a case about blackmail to a case of a missing person as well. And the third story is also, it starts with a missing persons case. And it has to do with these 2 people that run a bookshop. Now, it's not a queer bookshop, but both the owners are queer. They do have a lot of queer books. And at this time, they're not a couple, I should say. It's an older man and an older woman, but they're best friends. And they both go missing. And the overarching danger is that not only do they run this bookshop that is friendly to the queer community, they run a mail service where if you sign up for their mail service, you get a new queer book in the mail every month. And under the Comstock Act, that is illegal, right? It's considered mailing illicit material in the mail. And I think in 2025, too many of us know about the Comstock Act and the idea of, weaponizing what you can or cannot mail. So there's a concern that depending on why these people are missing, whether it was the feds that took them, or there is some sign in the beginning that one of them had some gambling debts at a casino that was run by the mob, so maybe it was the mob that took them. But there's a concern that whoever took them may also have the list of addresses of their mailing service, and they may put two and two together and figure out who all these people are, and all of a sudden there is just a beautiful address book full of names to blackmail, and so many lives that can be ruined, including a lot of Andy's friends and people Andy cares about at this point. So he becomes personally invested in all three of these cases. And so just to start with the idea of the mystery of them all, because they are mystery novels, detective mystery novels, the mysteries are fun. There are enough red herrings to keep you interested. They aren't overly twisty. They aren't overly complicated. I was able to guess the outcome of both the first and the third one before he was. The stories are written really well. I think the writing is strong. It is propelling. It pulls you forward. It's written in a first person, so you follow the main character all the time. And you always are in his head, so you only see the clues as he sees them. And now, like, for instance, in the third novel, there's a case where he sees a clue and it jumped out at me as being really important, and he doesn't really mention it very much. And so right away, I kind of had a glimpse of who I thought the killer was. And in the first one, none of the clues jumped out, but I just had an inkling from the way they were talking about it. And in retrospect, in the second one, I didn't figure out the second one until very close to the end, the same time the character did. But there was a moment earlier where my hackles were raised about something, and then I kind of had forgotten about it until it came up again. So the mysteries aren't super twisty, they aren't super complicated, but they're fun, and they aren't super obvious from the very beginning. Like there is some investigation that has to happen, and there are a few red herrings, so they're satisfying as far as mysteries go. Now, what is really satisfying about these series, though, is that first off, the characters are incredible. I think the main character, Evander Andy Mills, is really wonderful, and he is really learning about himself. And what's beautiful is over these three stories, he is growing into himself. He's learning about himself because, like I said, in the first story, the story started with him wanting to end his life. And now he was out already because he had been in the Navy before he was a police officer. He was sexually active, but he wasn't out publicly. Like, he knew who he was. He'd come to terms with the fact that he was queer, but he wasn't out in any way. Obviously, as a police officer, he couldn't be out. And now that he is accepting who he is, he's on this inner journey, and that inner journey intensifies throughout all three of these novels. You know, the novels take place over the span of about 9 months, I think, or over these three novels, or maybe a year or so. So there's continual growth in the character. It isn't stagnant. And some of the characters in the first novel reappear in the second, and then there are new characters that come in, and some of those also carry over to the third. So you see a repeating cast of characters that all are interesting. All of the characters are fun. You want to spend time with them, and you know, you can relate to them, especially if you have any experience in the queer community. There are different people in the community who you can see represented in these characters, who are on all different parts of the spectrum of age and of being out or not out and of profession and all these things. And not all of their choices or lifestyle decisions are ones you agree with, but they're all interesting, right? They create a really interesting group of characters that are constantly evolving and growing over the course of these three novels. And in addition to that, the mysteries, as they are, they reflect some of the inner turmoil and the inner journey that our main character is going on. So each of the mysteries ends up relating to him personally and to his personal journey that he's going through, which I don't know if that can last for the whole series, right? At some point, he's going to have to be a little more confident in who he is, and he's going to have to fill in his shoes and his suit a little better. But for the time being, as he's still discovering that, it is really appropriate and it's thematically resonant to see these cases and his personal journey be reflected in one another. So it's a fun way to write a story, and it's fun to engage with, right? Because it's not just one narrative, it's multiple narratives that are interwoven, and they're interwoven in ways that are thematically resonant and don't feel like it's just different pieces added together, but they don't fit in any coherent way. Instead, everything fits together really well. So that I really appreciate, and I think the characters are great. The character growth, the character journeys, and all of these ancillary characters who have something to do, who have something to add to the story, who aren't just in and out, they aren't cardboard, they aren't two-dimensional. Everyone is interesting in the story. So as I said, the writing itself, I think, is strong, it's propelling, the plotting is really nice, it pulls you forward, it keeps you invested. If the mystery itself gets a little slow, then there's personal things that fill in the gap, and then if the personal stuff gets put in the back burner, then new clues emerge for the mystery. So these two kind of parallel narratives that are always happening, the inner journey and then the mystery, they work hand in hand to keep the story moving really well. And I should say, all of these stories, all of these novels are only about 250 pages each. So they're not long, they're not drawn out. They get in and they get out, which is really refreshing, actually, because they're just enough time that you get to spend time with these characters in this world, but you don't ever feel like you are lingering on something or you're just wasting away. It's not drawn out in any way. The world building is also great. Now, I don't know what it was like in the 1950s in San Francisco, but the picture it paints in this story is really wonderful, and it makes you feel like you're there. So I think the world building is good, especially because the world building is critical to the story, because you have to imagine, I think the first one takes place in 1952, so it takes place right in the early 1950s. This is post the Kinsey report, but it's during the McCarthy era and during the Lavender Scare. So at this point, being queer itself isn't illegal, but basically engaging in any queer activities is illegal. And even though it isn't illegal, it'll cost you your job and your reputation, and you will be looked at as vermin, right? And as an ex-cop, there's this extra pressure because he knows that he was lucky when he was fired for the police force, that his boss protected him since he was such a good cop for so long, that he wasn't attacked or beaten up by his coworkers. But he knows that if they find out he's still in the city and he's doing PI work, then they're just going to beat the hell out of him. And there is a scene where his coworkers accost him and beat him really badly. And so homophobia and the constant need to hide and the constant fear of being outed is present throughout all these novels. And it's interesting because it creates a constant tension, because what can he do as a PI? What kind of justice can he really bring about? So there is this tension that the writer plays with, because there's only so far he can go. If he finds out who murdered this person, well, the police don't care about murdered gay people. They call it homicides, and they all become cold cases. So what can he do? What kind of justice is there? And for right now, I think it is interesting, the tension that creates and the way that makes the world always have a sense of paranoia and also a sense of helplessness, because it impacts what kind of investigation he can do and what kind of results he can have, and how free he is in expressing himself and trying to do his job to the best of his ability. It might get tired after a while. So always having this constant looking over your shoulder and an inability to really have actual change might get a little tiresome. But for right now, I think it's worked really well. And actually, like I said, I haven't read the fourth novel yet. It comes out in October. But reading the description of it, my impression is that he is on a missing persons case and he has to go to LA. So he leaves San Francisco. And that, I think, is great. That will bring a breath of fresh air to the story, where he isn't looking over his shoulder for his coworkers, because that fear of being constantly outed isn't quite as heavy if he's moving to a new city. So I think that's smart for the next novel. For these three novels, there is this constant paranoia, right? And one of the big fears that most of the characters have is being outed, that their secrets are being disclosed. And that is a big theme that runs throughout the story, having your secrets revealed. And what does it mean to know yourself, and what does it mean to share yourself with others? So this isn't a cozy mystery series, right? But if you were to look at the scale between, let's say, cozy on one side and really violent and grimdark on the other side, it's closer to cozy than it is to violent and grimdark. There are murders, but none of the murders are on the page. There is violence on the page. There is homophobia and there is misogyny on the page, but nothing especially egregious. There is some sexual situations on the page, and there's some kissing on the page, but there's no actual sex on the page. There's implied sexual activity. People will, go into a bedroom and get naked and get on the bed together, but then the scene cuts until after the act is done. So there's no spice on the page. It's just implied. So it isn't cozy, but it is closer to cozy. And what's interesting is a lot of the interior struggles that the main character is going through are very similar to a coming out novel, right? And the author has written a number of queer YA novels as well. And I think a lot of these themes and ideas are very similar to what you see in queer YA books, about learning who you are, about coming into your own, discovering yourself, discovering what it means to build a family network, to find people that are like you, to find people that don't judge you for who you are, and to accept yourself, right? To grow into yourself. Those are a lot of themes that you find in YA novels. Yet this isn't a YA novel. This is very clearly adult literature. And yet it has some of these YA themes, and I think it balances those two things well. There's a level of darkness and paranoia that's constantly there. There's a level of violence and intensity that really make this very firmly adult novels. But the ideas are ones that are shared with YA literature in such a way that it is a really interesting marriage. And so even if you're someone that isn't interested in YA, I don't think this would turn you off, but I think it is an interesting blend of what it means to come out, basically. And like I said, the character had already come to terms with himself, but now he's coming to terms with himself in a more public way, which is interesting to see. The character is 31 or 32, so he's still quite young, but in the scope of things, he's already been in the Navy, fought in the war, been a police officer, so he's lived quite a life, And so in addition to having really strong writing, strong plotting, interesting characters that you want to spend time with, and these not quite cozy but close to cozy vibes, I think the stories are tackling some interesting ideas. The third one especially is tackling ideas of censorship, what it means to write your story, who gets to share your story, do you have ownership of your story, or should it be shared with others? There is a subplot in the third story about a reporter who wants to report about this murder that our main character is investigating. And he knows that if she finds out that he's queer and writes anything about him being queer, then that's a death sentence for him. But she's insistent that the truth always has to be printed. The truth should never be hidden. So it doesn't matter who gets hurt. The truth is more valuable than individuals being hurt because her eye is on the greater good, quote unquote, and that might involve individual casualties on the way. Whereas he says, no, I need to protect myself and the people I care about. And so truth is only important when you're not sacrificing people for the truth. So it's looking at ideas of what is truth and who has a right to truth. It's also looking at ideas of censorship and of who gets to tell their story and what it means to see yourself represented in fiction and to see yourself represented in stories. The third story is a little heavy-handed in its loving care for literature and for the ability of books to make you feel seen and to make you learn about yourself, and the power of reading and the power of community that is formed through reading and a love of reading. So, I'm fine with that. I don't mind a heavy-handed message about how great reading is, especially in a time when censorship is on the rise. So I think that the third one, like I said, was a little heavy-handed, going into a little bit of cringe territory, but it was all wearing its heart on its sleeve in a way that I thought was appropriate and thematically resonant with what is going on in the world right now. So while they are unraveling these mysteries, they're also exploring this inner journey of learning who you are, learning about yourself, and so the characters have a consistent inner life that is paralleled the cases that they're finding. And on top of that, there are these bigger thematic ideas that the author is trying to play with. And I think he does so successfully for the most part across these three novels about learning who you are, learning your place in the world, learning what it means to have family, what it means to have a safe space, what it means to go to the mat for people you care about, but also what it means to trust others when they say they don't need your help, that they can stand up for themselves, right? There's this constant balance of trying to say, what does it mean to protect someone and what does it mean to be overbearing? What does it mean to trust others and what does it mean to take them for granted? These are all kind of interesting ideas that they aren't, except for the whole thing about books and reading and writing, except for that in the third novel, they aren't overblown. They aren't in your face, but they're constant struggles that our characters are facing. And because of that, and since it is a first person narrative, then you get to struggle with them as well. And I think it's a lot of fun. I should also add that I listen to these audiobooks, and the audiobook narrator, I don't know his name off the top of my head, but I think he did a great job. I will say that he has, for the main character and for the narration, he has a very stereotypical, gruff, hard-boiled detective kind of talking like this kind of a vibe. And it sounds great. It sounds exactly what you'd expect a hardboiled detective to sound like until you realize that he's only 31, the character. It sounds like, someone in his mid-50s. And so that's a little bit disconcerting because it definitely feels like an older, more grizzled kind of guy. And he's not. He's quite young and fit and not that old stereotype of a trench coat wearing PI. However, with that said, it does create a really good atmosphere. And for all the other characters, I think the narrator does a great job. So if you are inclined to reading audiobooks, I think these are good ones. All of the characters he does slightly different voices for. And it's interesting because you have this whole host of characters who, most of them are queer. And there are different levels of butchness and of being effeminate and different kind of sassiness, different accents. And he does them all with respect, but also in a way that differentiates who these different characters are, right? How effeminate they are. When the female impersonators, as they're called in the 1950s, when you have one of them who's a character versus a more butch lesbian character versus a gay man who's closeted and who works at a hotel, what are these different characters going to sound like? I think that the voice narrator does a really good job of having a wide cast of characters that feel genuine. But in general, I think these are wonderful stories. Like I said, the mysteries aren't super perplexing. They aren't super twisty. You will probably guess the ending a little bit before the ending comes, right? They aren't going to knock your socks off with how jaw-dropping the mysteries are. But they don't treat you like you're stupid, and they are genuine mysteries, and there are twists, there are turns, there are red herrings. None of it feels overwrought, and they're fun. Like, they are fun to go on these cases. And like I said, they're these quick little stories with really propulsive writing, 250 pages each. You get in, you get out, and it's satisfying. So these are satisfying PI novels set in an interesting world of what it's like to be gay in the 1950s in San Francisco at a time when being gay, like I said, wasn't illegal, but it was close to illegal. So you have this constant tension from within and from without, never mind the cases that are going through these stories. And I think if you pick them up, you'll have a great time. I know I did. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you read any of these? Have you read anything else by Lev AC Rosen, including some of his YA literature? What do you think about gay detectives in general? I know there are a few other gay detective stories out there, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about any of those down in the comments below. But for now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.